Greg Stanley. I'm here with Wes Warren. Today, we'd like to talk about profitability in a dental practice, and maybe from a little different standpoint. We've seen in other industries, medicine, optometry, managed care driving down reimbursement, less and less profit, doctors spending less time with patients, finally sending in physicians' assistants. In other words, they keep having to find fallback strategies to try to even stay profitable. Major corporations buying them up. So that's the question. Is this happening in dentistry? Is dentistry in the same boat that some of these other organizations, industries that have been devastated by this effort? Are we in the same boat they are, Wes?
We're certainly heading in that direction. There's no doubt about it. So you got all your costs are going up way faster than your revenue is going to go up. Insurance will not keep up with those costs. Will doctors tolerate it is the question. Will they just kind of shrink up and be happy with less? Yeah, there's a new generation of doctors that I would say, yeah, they probably are actually okay with less. They're just not as motivated as let's say the baby boomer generation or even my generation. This newer generation just doesn't have the same motivation. So yeah, we're going to see a time where dentistry is not as profitable. And you want to make sure that your practice is absolutely positioned so that doesn't happen to you, so the profit doesn't get drained out of your practice. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. There's all the different things that we see that can enrich the practice so that you don't head down this path of becoming basically a non-for-profit and working for nothing and just becoming like an employee dentist at your own office. That's kind of what's trying to happen for the younger generation. So yeah, we're talking about strategies, Greg, on how to make sure this doesn't happen to you. So number one, what would you say is the number one strategy? I believe I have mine, but I want to see what you would put as your top strategy.
Well, I think in time, the market dictates the limits of what we can do. For example, some doctors say, I'm only going to be out of network, or I'm only going to be do big cases, or I'm only going to do this or that. Well, there's a market for that. There's a market for your quality and your way of working. But that's a limited market. It's not unlimited. So whether you'll reach your goals with your stance, with your strategy is a good question. For example, I tell a lot of my clients now that they've got to start working into their mix a better case, a bigger case. This idea that you can take a whole bunch of new patients into your office, show them a ton of work they weren't expecting, and have that turn out well, that's not going right. They do well, though, if they meet the patient's needs, do a lot of crown and bridge, do the basics, and are able to pull out good work for people that can afford to pay for it, with or without insurance. That's what I'm saying. That's my strategy. Go ahead, Wes.
Yeah, I would agree. That's kind of what I see as being the kind of the cherry on the top of a practice, where you see supercharged net. So, when we look at practices, we definitely look at their net, and we'll see practices netting, typical 35, 38, 33%, kind of in the 30s somewhere. But occasionally we see them at 50%, at 45%, netting 55% net, and even higher. And this is the thing that usually when you dive in is happening. You got an office that's doing 100,000 a month, and it requires the same overhead that most of us have to deal with. So you can have 30% staff costs, and all that stuff works out. It's when they add on one or two big cases and they drive the thing up to 160,000 a month with the overhead of a practice of 100,000. And then you see these supercharged nets. And it's taking a practice that doing the bread and butter, doing the normal dentistry, and adding a couple big cases a month is when you see the net be substantial.
The temptation is incredible when one of those big cases comes in, gladly pays the money, the temptation can be overwhelming to say, this is who I am. I don't
This
want
is
anything.
all I want to do. Yeah, yeah. The thing that will mess you up on this strategy is just that, where you go, I just want to do all TMJ. I just want to do all, these kind of cases.
Implant.
Yeah, it just the way the system works is you get a nice patient flow to the practice, have a nice marketing system set up or a nice amount of referrals to the practice, and you pull out a few of these larger cases. I want to say nonchalantly, but yeah, where it just kind of emerges and you let it emerge by asking some basic questions. You want to get your team involved in asking about their smile. Would they improve anything? Get the patient talking about really improving their whole smile, not just fixing the one tooth that hurts them. And that's the kind of the secret behind it, is getting the patient to talk about what they would want ideally, not with you, the doctor. That's the mistake. It's got to be with a team member. And when the team member says, Wes is actually interested in doing X, then you can bring up a treatment plan. And it's got to be this is an option for you. You can do it all if you'd want. And if you do that, yeah, you can pick up these nice cases. The other avenue, Greg, is to actually market for these big cases. So where you have your normal practice set up, and then you've got a nice part of your marketing budget designed really to pick up these implant cases. If you're doing like an all-on-4 type of supported denture, TMJ even, I've seen people experiment with sleep, mediocre to okay success with marketing that. But where you get a marketing angle going for specifically these large cases, and when they come through, everybody knows what they're doing in terms of treating them differently as quote unquote a bigger case. And that can be also very effective. And we see that all the time as well. That to me is the number one way to defeat rising costs, adding in something that generates a larger case. So it could be sedation dentistry. There's quite a few options.
They all have their special knowledge requirements. I've seen people set out to do sedation, to do implant, placement, to do cosmetics, all these things. There's a whole set of specialized knowledge that has to be obtained. And you're thinking, well, I tried that, it didn't work. There was some specialized knowledge you didn't get access to. Sometimes people do that, they set out in that direction, and they finally kind of decide, well, that's not who I am. Let me give you an example, Les. If you have a real defined, highly competitive market, for example, cosmetics or implant placement or whatever, you find yourself at the top or the bottom of the marketing funnel. In other words, people are just starting to make calls from the advertisements, and maybe you're the first person they call, but they intend to call a number of people. Right. And finally, they fall into the office, get the work done with the office that's the best on the telephone. When you're at the bottom of the funnel, they've already tried a lot of other offices. Odds are pretty good that if you're okay on the phone, you'll probably get them. They're tired of the search. So that's a reality when you start down this path. This idea that you can market for these people, yes, you can, but you have to spend the money. And I might add, you have to do whatever it takes to master the phone skills at the front desk to get these people in the door.
The other thing you have to do is, in most cases, you have to really incentivize your quote unquote treatment coordinator. So in offices like this, we'll have a special bonus on cases that are unusual in your practice. So if your practice really doesn't get a lot of $10,000 cases and above, we'll set up a special bonus system for a treatment coordinator for those cases, where they can do rather well closing a couple of those cases a month So it's not uncommon that we'll see 2 or 3% of the case on cases of that size or bigger. Um, that's another little secret. You've got to get somebody fully engaged, willing to go the extra mile with the patient.
And the ones that we've actually seen this happen with, when this person quits or moves or away or whatever, unless you've brought somebody else up to speed where they have a pretty good idea how to pick up where the other person left off, it's like the Royals, Harry, an heir and a spare, he's the spare. So very much like that. We need a spare. We need somebody that can step in. So if you have one person, yeah, it's very profitable. It's very rewarding to see one big case fall after another. That person leaves and all you've got to show for it is overhead.
Yeah, you don't want to ramp up too much of your overhead. So when you've got this model going, to assume that it's going to last forever, or to assume that you can count on it, I should say, because it is, you are, live by the sword, die by the sword is the saying. If you build your overhead up to be right next to where you're producing, that's not what we're talking about.
So
This is putting the cherry on the top of the practice. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. The strategy we're talking about then overall, the big picture, is we're going to keep our regular practice going in high gear, but we're going to make time for the big case once a week, twice a week, whatever you have access to. We're going to tune our marketing for that. So there's some marketing going to help attract that kind of case.
Right.
We're going to be incentivizing and training staff on the inbound call to get those people through the door and pay them for it. Make sure that we pay our staff something extra for it. That's the essence of it. Now, some people might hear that and say, well, that's a lot of work, or that's a lot of risk, or, well, that's where we're headed. And other industries have literally circled the drain by waiting to the end with that. Let me give you an example. In medicine, we saw all these stopgap measures where they were sending in the physician's assistant, or they were actually having certain type of cases meet as a group of all things. And I mean, they were just doing all kind of things.
Yeah.
Medical doctors got faster and faster. Finally, we started to see doctors leaving the industry to set up
to drive cabs
in Washington, D.C., or weight loss clinics and all. In other words, they just literally, now other doctors, medical doctors, my own doctor, he, on the other hand, created a system within the practice of people paying a membership in a medical doctor's office, and he has survived. He's got a beautiful office. In other words, he adapted. Everybody else waited, thinking that the era of managed care would be gone and would be back, to rolling big dice. Really didn't happen. In dentistry, my suggestion is just what we talked about. Bread and butter dentistry with, as you said, the occasional big case, occasional being weekly, and you advertise for it. You know how to close on it. You have all the equipment that it takes to deliver it.
Some doctors we work on getting out of network in. So if you're a solo doctor and you're not going to go the associate route, it's possible to get out of network with, I would say, most insurances, maybe even all, depending on the situation. Very, very tricky. And it's kind of one of those things that you definitely want a little advice on. And if you're thinking about going that route, you'd want to talk to somebody like Greg and myself about your practice, how much demand it really has, how booked out are you really? When you get enough demand and you're booked out far enough, yes, you can absolutely start weeding out some of the plans. So that's
deep discounts.
That's definitely an option. The other things, like raising your fees, that goes right along with that, obviously. Other points would be, stopping missed appointments, getting better case acceptance across the board in the practice. Just about any practice that we work with has missed appointments in hygiene and some on the dental side, but mostly in hygiene, that if we we're diligent in filling those, it has an impact in the net of the practice, but also case acceptance, getting a 20% and bump on case acceptance. So working on your systems, your scripts, how cases are developed with the pre-assessing with your hygienist, how they talk about dentistry, and how they hand off to you, the patient, perfecting all that has an impact. Absolutely. It's a lot of work. It's as much work as doing this big case thing, probably a little more work, because you're having to train team members and get them up to speed and kind of counting on them. With the big case thing, less so. You can kind of almost do that yourself. Those are some of the other options. Greg, is there anything I missed?
Oh, there's just a lot of little things you could fix in your practice. For example, making your marketing pay. Marketing is one of the biggest drains in overhead there is. It can be so unprofitable if you really aren't good at it. You know, you don't have enough operatories, and so people that aren't paying you are filling up those ops, you know, all kind of different things to look at, and knowing when to spend, when not to spend. We talk about not getting ahead of the money, but there comes a point where if you don't spend it, you'll never know the profits you could be having. That's pretty much.
Can I talk about a little bit on those, a practice that's already filled and the spots are being filled with unproductive stuff? We see this a lot in offices. You're pretty full, you're booked out pretty far, but it's not really lucrative. There is a ratio you want to have in your practice with your cases, and you have to block your schedule for high production. You need high production zones, and then obviously lower production zones in your practice. And it really should be like 2 weeks, a week or two to get in on a bigger case. So if you want to do a crown, something like that, or bigger, it's a week to get in. If you've got something small, it's 4 weeks, 3 weeks. So there's certainly a ratio you want to have of 1 week to 3 weeks is kind of this, and that's how you know you got your production zones just right. What happens is the team blows it. They just schedule right over top of your production zones and add in smaller stuff and don't believe it'll get filled in time. You want to get that worked out and make sure that they know what they're doing. You have the correct amount in your practice, and it should change, meaning in time, you know, you should have to change your production zones. Always be aware of it.
You know, nobody's clamoring typically to get treatment anyway. I was at my dentist's office to get cleaning, and they found a single surface filling. And they literally didn't schedule me. It just kind of went away. They got back to me about 3 or 4 weeks later, got it scheduled. I went in and did it. That didn't bother me a bit. So
yeah, right.
I did it when they had the time, basically. All right, so we talked about some things. The basic strategy is keep it going and add the bigger case. There's a lot to learn. We've recorded things about it. We're going to be recording things about it. So stay in touch and give Wes and I a call if you have questions.
All right, thanks for listening.
Thank you.